so much, Megan. Megan actually has touched on a lot of what is another core principle of the People's Climate Plan, namely the transition to a new renewable energy economy, which in recognizing that in our transition to that new economy, we need to be training workers and giving them the support they need to make that transition. So it very much relates to what I was talking about previously regarding justice. So we need to be investing in green infrastructure, in public transit, in the kind of jobs of the future that, so we can give people jobs that they can be proud of, that are not complicit in climate injustice and other social injustices, but rather they are part of the future and a better future. But in order to make that transition, we need to respect and align with climate science, and that's telling us that we need to keep the majority of fossil fuels in the ground. So I think Adam is going to talk a bit about the science and policy side, and we can talk a bit more about that afterwards. So Adam Scott is a senior campaigner at Oil Change International, which is a research and communication and advocacy organization focused on exposing the true costs of fossil fuels. Adam has been involved in a range of research and advocacy positions as a youth climate activist at international UN conferences, working as an academic and nonprofit environmental researcher, and extensive campaign and organizing work. Before moving to Oil Change International, Adam worked at Environmental Defence Canada, leading campaigns to stop oil pipelines and tar sands expansion. And he is based here in Toronto. Thanks.
Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to thank the organizers for pulling together this amazing event and inviting me to be on the panel. Learned a ton just sitting here for the last 3 presentations, so it's been really fantastic. I think for my short 10 minutes or so, I'll try to pull back and give a bit of context for sort of where we are and how we got here, and then talk about some of the specific issues Canada's facing around the challenge of putting in place a real climate plan. And I can talk a little bit more about something that I spent a lot of my time working on, which is pipelines and tar sands, which we generally call the elephant in the room around these discussions. So I'll try to go through it in that order, and I'll try to keep it brief, and maybe we can have more rich discussion and a Q&A after. So internationally, we've known about the issue of climate change for a really long time, decades now. We've had numerous attempts to try to deal with this issue, and if you look at most of the countries around the world, it's just really only existed at a discussion level. There's been very few concrete climate plans put in place around the world that are actually having a measurable impact on emissions. And I won't go through the whole long history of that, but we've known the science of this issue for a very long time. We've been in international negotiations for 20 years now, and yet we really haven't done anything. At least I'll speak specifically in Canada. Canada has effectively no federal climate policies on the books of any kind. There's a few little bits and pieces around vehicle regulations, and there's a few pieces around coal that are incredibly weak, but really we functionally have nothing. We're happy to say that we did come to some agreement in December at the Paris Climate Conference globally for the very first time on what's going to be required to actually prevent the very worst impacts of global warming. And really the recognition that we need to keep emissions globally to 1.5 degrees did come out, and that's a really positive thing. For a long time, there's been discussion about 2 degrees, and what that means, and maybe I should explain the 2 really quickly. These projections are based on the amount of carbon pollution that has been put in the atmosphere on a cumulative basis. So over the history of society, how much carbon have we dumped into the air? And what does that add up to in terms of warming the global temperature on average? So where we are today, we're on track right now to double CO2 in the atmosphere, and if we want to have any chance of avoiding the very worst impacts of climate change, 2 degrees is considered by the global scientific community a threshold by which we have a 50% chance of climate change running away. And doesn't matter what we do at that point, it will continue to accelerate because of positive feedback loops in the climate system. So 2 degrees is not a target. 2 degrees is the absolute, we call it the guardrail, the absolute maximum threshold that would be acceptable. 1.5 degrees is widely considered much safer, although there still be very severe impacts worldwide, and we should not minimize those. Very, very significant. But so the Paris Agreement basically acknowledged we want to hit as close to 1.5 degrees as we can, with 2 degrees is the absolute threshold. That was agreed to in Paris, but the conversation, I think it's become pretty clear, at least in my viewpoint, that most people don't understand what that really means. Not really.